when I heard about the problem of plastics and the accountability and what we were doing, I did as much as I could with lots of committed people to fix the problem of plastic waste at Adidas. But you could only go so far at a certain point. So ultimately, you take the hard decision to say, okay, I'm going to step away from this, and I'm going to try to achieve this thing that we all talk about, but we don't know how to get there. So let me go as a startup where I have more permission to do things, to be a bit of a disruptor, and to see if I can go out there and, again, with committed people, to solve the problem of waste in fashion. And that led us down this plant-based solution. It was the hardest 4 years of my life so far. One of the cool things is insulation is always a problem if you're doing stuff out of plant-based fashion, because we are 100% plant-based, so we can't make any exceptions, and we don't want to use any birds either, because we're still very much vegan as well. So, what's happening is you're discovering more and more natural elements you can apply, and the kapok tree has been all of a sudden this rich unlock for insulation, and I didn't even know it existed, to be quite honest. But there's a company called Flocus, which is making a sustainable company and resource out of the kapok tree buds. And it's like, you don't kill the tree, you just harvest the seeds that drop from it. And for those of you who don't know, the kapok seed, when it opens up, it has basically this silky, smooth, cottonous fiber, which it's not as usable as cotton, but it is used it can be used as a pad. And anytime you have a pad, you can create insulation. Wow. So,
and where are these trees?
Primarily in equatorial regions. So I think they're native of Africa, but they've spread now. And I think we're getting most of ours from the Philippines, I believe. But I'd have to do some research. Flocus is it's an FSC supported, so it's all the different certifications of its positive, sustainable, conscious company. But I just thought it was really interesting, just as a soundbite, to talk about like the different things you have to come upon when you're on this journey.
Yeah, I mean the innovations never seem to amaze me when you go back to nature.
They never stop.
Right.
I mean, if you just apply it, and I guess that's where we came at. It's like it's not much of a secret in the fashion industry to know that the answer is following nature's playbook.
Right.
What happened is unit economics, capitalism, all these things, bottom line, diligence, all came into play. So you need cheaper and cheaper and cheaper things to make more and more, and that led us to, as an industry, to petrochemicals and the petroleum and
that whole fast fashion.
Yeah, and you get into plastics and everything else. Yeah. So, and that's now 70% of the industry. But my mission, our mission at Unless, is to focus on really what happens at the end of your product's life. Right. And I think that's pretty interesting if you look at it that way.
Let's talk about that, because out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
People throw it away. They're still under the delusion that they throw away their plastics into the recycled bin, and most of that is not recycled. Or people don't even realize most of the things that they're maybe trying to do ethically is unrecyclable anyway, because of the layers, because of all. So let's just be clear here.
There is no way.
I love that. I love that you said that, because there's no way.
No, there's no way. There might be no way from your house and your proximity and your visibility, but it doesn't mean it goes away from planet Earth. It goes somewhere.
And ultimately, you can make the argument that it comes back to you in some form or fashion.
Well, there's evidence saying it absolutely does. Yeah. Your book brings it out very clearly. I mean, all the research I've done and my, albeit layman's way of doing it, not to your thoroughness, but you either breathe it in the air, you drink it in the water, you eat it in your food, and what is it? You're ingesting up to a credit card of plastic a week, full of the phthalates and the other chemicals that go into curing those plastics. So that's doing all sorts of harm to our bodies that we're just starting to understand. I mean, the study last week was testicles, testicles, and
microplastics and testicles.
What's funny is I listen to a lot of podcasts, as I'm sure you do too. And I saw some of the big investors podcasts. So, oh my God, we got plastic on our balls, and then all of a sudden it made it above their radar so they could talk about it. It's like, guys, it's in our hearts too. It's in our brains. It's in our vascular system. It's causing carcinogenic issues with our body. So, but it's. Every day goes by, there seems to be another announcement of where plastics are in us.
Yeah, and the thing is that when I was writing the book, it became very clear that as within, so without. So every bit of our destruction of finding pollution in us,
Yeah.
right, is also finding it all over in the globe, in the far off islands
Yep.
that you will never see, and that bits of plastic, Malaysia, Bali, what is it, not the Farallon Islands, the Pacific. There's that set of islands in the Pacific where they study great whites and everything else, but there's no people, and these birds are dying because of ingestion of plastic.
Oh, I saw the film on the albatrosses.
Yeah, albatross.
Midway Island.
Midway Island.
Yeah,
So if that's not the farthest, that is the farthest island from any place on the planet.
Yep.
And it's contaminated to a degree it's actually killing the birds and whatever else. And that's not even saying the micro side. That's the stuff you can see. So there's no way. And unless we deal with the end of life, I'm curious, we will just continuously just pollute ourselves. I'm curious, like, the responsibility. You're taking it on with your company.
Yep.
You're taking it on because it's the right thing to do, right? You're taking on because it's a moral, I believe it's a moral obligation.
Sure.
Especially when you know.
Yeah.
And then you don't do it, or you do it. That's now between you and this freaking great spirit mystery, right? So you're doing that. So you couldn't even stop yourself busting these things out as soon as we got here, right?
Because I have such admiration for you and what you do and your expertise. I was very, very excited about today, showing you everything we're doing.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because it's beyond, because what is abundance, what is wealth, what is profit, right? You're operating beyond that. Of course, you have to have a sustainable business. It has to have an economic engine, but you're standing for something a lot more than that. So my question is, where do you think the rules, the regulations of a company producing something and being responsible for its end of life, right? Coca-Cola.
Yeah, sure. I mean, listen. I mean, you're hard pressed to name more than a handful of examples of companies that take responsibility for their product when you're done using it.
Right.
In fact, there's now a policy being written primarily in Europe called extended producer responsibility, EPR. It hasn't passed anything yet, but there is policy being, kind of driving this push towards circularity. And I think there's a lot of great innovators talking about circularity and recycling and getting things back from the consumer. I am hopeful for all of it. I think it's going to take all of us, but knowing what I know, and I've been in the fashion industry 30 years now, and we can talk about the Adidas experience if you like, but ultimately there is no silver bullet. And I think that we all need to get to work, and everybody in the industry that I come from in fashion knows that, the holy grail, if you will, the solution is to stop making things out of petroleum-based feedstocks and start making things out of plants.
Right.
And you can do it. You just have to have the commitment to do it, and you have to have the time to do it, and you have to have the tolerance for accepting lower margins in the beginning, which is the key thing that drives most companies. So I think when you can, one of the reasons I left Adidas, and the primary reason was to do this, because this was in our head. It was everybody knew that to make things out of plants and minerals is the solution. However, you have too many other responsibilities, too many other mouths to feed in a big company, too many other fiduciary responsibilities to say you can go from 20 billion making things out of petroleum to 20 billion making things out of plants. It's just the innovations weren't there yet to commiserate with the unit economics that are required of a public company. But startups, that's where startups come in. So when I left Adi, it was because my eyes were wide open. I was going to do this with some fellow believers, and we were going to make the best effort to start with the end in mind first.
Right.
So what happens to our product? What happens to this crew when I'm done wearing it? It goes harmlessly away and becomes plant and worm food. And I think that's the solace thing. What happens to this shoe? 100% first ever shoe made out of 100% plants and minerals. And so it'll go harmlessly away. It may take more time than this shirt, which we can make go away in 30 days at your industrial composter, or it goes away on its own in your garden. I mean, it's just the thing is it's going to go harmlessly away and not end up poisoning your food chain, which is, what we can talk about with plastics. So when you ask me, what is the responsibility of a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi or a fashion company? I think they all need to hold themselves to that standard. You can't just make packaging or products that ultimately you then wash your hands and go away. And I think you did a great job in your book of illustrating the issue that people can put whatever they want into the product. As long as it's not proven to be harmful, it's buyer beware. And we're back in the caveat emptor days that we learned about in high school, like with economy classes and stuff. It's really mind boggling that the onus is on the consumer to prove that there's
and largely they don't even know to be aware.
Of course not, because there's no smoking gun. There's no smoking gun.
Right.
So the smoking gun would be, somebody's actually dying in a short amount of time.
Right.
We can talk about any kind of war thing. That's a smoking gun, but there's no smoking gun when it comes to these slower toxins that are releasing into our bodies. And you see it, and you had the very personal example with your father. I think everyone's touched by cancer. Yeah. I think the cancer rates are going through the roof. I mean, I think it's no coincidence.
Yeah, no, the formaldehydes, the dyes, the PFASs, all of these things. And there was a recent article that came out about Chris Hansen in the 90s. She was early graduate student, and she started doing testing within 3M.
Okay, yeah.
And then started seeing all this PFAS in blood samples.
Ouch.
She couldn't find a human alive
without it
in the 90s. Come to find out, she kept pulling the string. She had to go back in time to find blood samples like of deceased people.
Pre-Teflon.
Yeah. To not have PFAS in the blood of everybody.
And this is a known toxin. This is a known.
This is
the worst
known,
of the worst.
Gnarly, one of the worst, and just again, plausible deniability.
Well, and this is what a lot of companies, some of the most famous sustainable companies, are still using PFAS, and if only committed to phasing them out by 2030 or something crazy like that. Right. And I'm sorry, if you can't make a product that without PFAS tomorrow, then you shouldn't be making the product. And the excuses they come back, we're a high altitude mountaineering brand and we need to protect our climbers. It's like, excuse me, what about the rest of us? You're protecting your climbers, then I got an idea. Don't climb Everest if you can't do it without PFAS.
There was others before you.
There's a radical idea. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
So
and just for everyone knowing, PFAS within water wicking and waterproofing is really good at its job.
Really good.
Right?
Plastic is really good at its job.
Exactly.
But there's unintended consequences up and down the line.
And that's the thing. When you said that about we've agreed, and this is the game though. This is the tobacco game. Mm-hmm. We'll phase it out.
Sure.
And then you've just moved the target. No one's really watching you. By 2030, everyone's forgot about that article back in 2024. But when they say we're going to phase out, it's actually not true, right? Because they're phasing out maybe current stuff, but in terms of PFAS, it's forever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not phase out. You continue to add it into the environment. You continue to infect the next generations more and more and more. And that's where, I'm a simple guy from Minnesota.
I'm from Wisconsin,
Midwest, right? So my heart comes from a common sense kind of thing. It comes from that. It's taken me a long. I've got screwed over in business. I've got screwed over by what people say, and like the naive part of me, I believe what they say.
Sure.
Right? It takes a lot for me to go, I hire somebody to do a background check on like certain and I still believe in the heart of humans. I still believe in common sense. I still believe it, but it's unwritten in that book are hundreds of swear words because I'm reading stuff.
Yeah.
I'm reading the research. I'm reading knowable choices from people who have families and children and legacy, and yet they still do absolutely the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's a very fundamental human nature question. It's like, why? Right. Is it just to make more money? I mean, and I get money's critical in our social situation. We all need money to survive, and but what is enough? And is it enough to? Would you really want to poison future generations to get there? So to me, it's. You asked me earlier, it's like, well, why are you doing what you're doing? It's like, because it just feels like the right thing to do, not only from a personal legacy standpoint, but looking back on indigenous cultures and how they would prioritize 7 generations. How does my decision today affect 7 generations from now? And guess what? We all hope to have 7 generations of legacy also. So, I have children, they're going to have children, and they're going to have children. And, what are we leaving behind for them? What do we want to be known for?
Totally.
What is our generation going to be recognized for? And hopefully it's not just, takers and plunderers, but it's more givers and nurturers.
Well, it's these types of conversations that just, we have to have them. And, you asked me how earlier before filming and recording and how the book's going. It's like, I don't know. Like I don't look at the numbers but I do know it's hard.
Yeah.
I do know it's a hard-facing fact of what's going on in reality from many different directions. Mm-hmm. And it can be and feel like it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know about you, but
anytime you're building, anytime you're creating something it's really hard. I mean, like when I did I was the president of the Adidas brand. And that was fantastic, and I love that job. I'm a sports guy. I'm happiest when I'm doing sports, thinking about sports, talking about sports, having done sports. That's when I'm at my best. But ultimately, when I heard about the problem of plastics and the accountability and what we were doing, I did as much as I could with lots of committed people to fix the problem of plastic waste at Adidas. But you could only go so far at a certain point. So ultimately, you take the hard decision to say, okay, I'm going to step away from this and I'm going to try to achieve this thing that we all talk about, but we don't know how to get there. So let me go as a startup where I have more permission to do things, to be a bit of a disruptor, and to see if I can go out there and, again, with committed people, to solve the problem of waste in fashion. Mm-hmm. And that led us down this plant-based solution. It was the hardest 4 years of my life so far. It's like I'm getting not only an MBA in humility and, and basically resilience, but an MBA in just like finding out like all the dead ends you have to go through. And we did this during COVID, and we did this with, you go into a factory and you say, hey, Mr. Factory, can you make this shoe with alternative materials and make them in a different way you usually make them, and only make like 500 because I can't afford more. And they're like, hey, Eric, get the fuck out of here. Right.
It's not going to work for our model. Right.
Well, it's like they're based on minimum order quantities. And guess what? During COVID, all the factories were filled to the gills because everybody was sitting home shopping and buying stuff. So nobody was looking for business. It's gotten better since, but it's hard to build. And going back to your book, it's hard to build, but somewhere there's magic in the hard work that goes into that, right? Somewhere there's going to be I just believe in karma. I believe that, you get what you put into things in life. Mm-hmm. And so far it's served me well. So I think that whether it be your book or this brand or this company and this effort, I think it will come back to further, hopefully, the human race.
Right. Yeah. It's, and it just feels better.
Yeah,
like
absolutely
doing the right thing,
absolutely,
and putting your time, because at the end of the day, it's time. What kind of ball are you swinging at the time that you're here? You know, it's like,
That's an interesting question. I like it. Is all about time, because time is one of those compound, things. It's like a compound interest. The more you put into one area, the less you have it somewhere else. But hopefully that time multiplies over there.
Yeah.
So I found when I left the big company, I put a much higher value on my time. So I live by this thesis of 0 wasted hours. So it's like if I'm not doing something for myself, my family, my friends, my community, or my world, I'm just not doing it. Now, when you're in a big company, you don't have that kind of optionality. Right. You are, no. You have a meeting culture, and you are going to be booked from 9 till 6 every day on 30-minute blocks. And, here's how you do. And you'll be lucky to carve out an hour sport break or something for lunch. But it's you're getting on planes and trains and automobiles, and you're traveling to see different people for a variety of reasons. Lots of it very well-meaning, but some of it's a lot of obligation. It's an obligatory meeting culture, an obligatory travel culture, and I can look myself in the mirror now that those days are over.
How long were you?
26 years.
26 years.
26 years at Adidas. Yeah.
And you're running it for the.
Well, I started next to the mailroom, and I did about every job I could in the U.S., and then I was taken over to headquarters in Germany. And I did another 13 years there, and I finished as a board executive in charge of the brand, which in American it was in German definition, it's executive board member global brands. To make it easy in America language, it's president of the Adidas and Reebok brand. That was my last job.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. I had the time of my life. It was I spent when I left Adi, it was almost half of my life. So I spent almost half my life there. So wouldn't trade it for the world, but it informed me in a lot of ways to now, not just learn about international travel and cultures and living overseas, and all those things were wonderful, but also the impact that fashion has on the overall planet and the climate change and ocean degradation and all these wonderful things I learned about that I decided to do something about the rest with my remaining chapters.
Yeah. So was there a final kind of tick that just kind of was like?
Yeah. Well, so in 2014, I was introduced to Parley for the Oceans, a gentleman by name Cyril Gooch. And Parley for the Oceans is a ocean advocacy group that really supports generating awareness and caring for the oceans through the activities they do. They're very design-led. They believe in designers and engineers can solve the problems that we face. And Cyril walked in my office one day and said, "Hey, would you like to fix the oceans?" And I was like, "I'd like to, but I'm a little busy over here, in my day job. But personally, yes, I'm all in."
Right.
And then he went on to educate me on the problem of plastic pollution in the oceans and the role. This is the killer. The role that fashion plays in that. So the microplastics we talked about earlier, and the phthalates that come into that with the chemicals. They're literally poisoning the phytoplanktons and the krill and these little things they're responsible for every second breath. Well, I was taking all that in, and then you start meeting people like Captain Paul Watson from Sea Shepherd and Sylvia Earle, her World of Deepness, and they start telling you about these things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. So once you hear these things,
so now knowledge is hitting you head on.
Now I can't unhear them. Now I can't unsee them. So I'm like, okay, and I did. So we at Adidas immediately started to pick a fight with plastic. We committed to getting rid of our plastic bags in retail, getting rid of our plastic beads in our beauty care, getting rid of all plastic bottles, just everybody is just and committing. This is the big one: committing to getting 100% off of virgin polyester, which was 70% of our feedstock, by 2024. So you had to take bites from an economic standpoint of the elephant, but that was back in 2019. So we, within 5-6 years, they did it. And I'm not there anymore, but I still think they're honoring that promise. So going from all that virgin polyester to recycled, which is good, but it's a start, right?
Right.
So at a certain point, you did all that, and I was like, this is something I care about. This is something I'm passionate about. But because I was a board member and responsible for all these other things, I could only put 5% of my time. There's the magic word again: 5%, 10% of my time into solving for this. So it came to a head at one point where I just couldn't, you can only whisper yourself to sleep so often.
Right.
So it's like, okay, Eric, it's time to put up or shut up. So lots of good conversations with my wife, and decided to walk in the office one day and decide to I have to go do something else now. So,
wow.
but yeah, that was the inflection point. And then end of 19. So what happens in the early 20? COVID hits. So I'm out there raising money in COVID. I think I was in New York, the second week in March, right before New York shut down. So it was like just talking to investors. So luckily we were able to raise some money over primarily Zoom calls, and got started during COVID. So, but the inflection point was really just the build up of this knowledge and inability to walk away from it and shake it out of my head.
Wow. Well, yeah, there had to be some grief with 26 years.
Oh, yeah.
There had to be some like, holy shit, right? And
there was a lot of that. There's a lot of in Germany they have an expression, and I'll spare you my German butchering, but one eye is crying while the other one is smiling.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good expression.
Right. Yeah, it's we don't grieve well at all, I don't think, in terms of culture. And we want to jump to, try to be excited or whatever else, but I think it's absolutely true, and I think that it's easy to be convenienced into your job. Like you've been doing it so long, and then okay, maybe 5-10% is enough. You could easily have made that argument.
Oh, and I did for if Cyril walked in my office in 2014, I left end of 19.
Right.
So we did a lot of work. And the question I always get from people is like, why didn't you do what you're doing at Adidas? I was like, it's really hard, first of all, to make things out of 100% plants. Right. And it's to do that within
scale.
You can do that in a little capsule collection once or twice, but ultimately the business is going to go where the business is going to be most successful. So it wasn't going to be a receptive audience over the long run to nurturing it and growing it the way it needs to. And I think that's just the fact of how big businesses run is like you had things like Lionel Messi, you had Kanye West, you had football, basketball, running, you had all these different priorities, you had innovations around Boost and these different things that were great for the company, and especially coming back from where they were back in 2014 from a business standpoint. And we were very successful. We grew from 2014 to 2019, $8 billion in 6 years. Amazing, like biggest turnaround in the company's history, if not the industry's. However, that comes at feeding the beast. And so they don't have time to do these little projects over here that might or may not resonate with the consumer. Luckily, Ocean Plastic really resonated with the consumer. That business scaled into well over $1 billion for Adidas in a short time frame as well. So doing good, that actually fueled my ideas. Doing good with the Parley for the Oceans Association really said, hey, listen, this is not philanthropy. This can actually drive brand advocacy. So then it's all about the storytelling. So then when you talk about the material innovation of Ocean Plastic, by showing, a sea turtle drowning in a gill net and saying, you, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer, can fix this by buying this product, that became a very powerful mechanism to show that it wasn't just, again, philanthropy or philanthropic efforts. It was like you can be rewarded for being a good corporate citizen by your consumer base and build your consumers out.
Well, there's a couple of things. Applaud you for doing that and getting it going, and then the thing that I'm always encouraged by is the power of people when they know, especially when they start to become aware of things. They want the right thing. Yeah, like they would rather not poison themselves or their children with the clothing or the whatever consumable they're buying. They'd rather not. Yeah, but they don't have they don't have a lot of choices, especially the further economic ladder you're going down. It's less and less of a choice. So it's great to be, I'm sure for you, once you did a little bit and to see the population want to support it and supporting it, right? And then it becomes a wind in your sail. Right? And then there's this other side where we have so many companies trying to take that and falsifying it through eco-washing and all of this, No,
listen, I mean, the sustainability as a macro buzzword is very on trend, and everybody's saying it. So I always joke with people like, the first thing that tells me you're not really sustainable is when you say you're sustainable.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
can we dig underneath that, please? Can we say, okay, what do you mean sustainable? Are you talking about bioplastics? Are you talking about biofabrication? Are you talking about recycled? When you talking about partially recycled? It's like anybody can say, oh, we're sustainable, we're green. I'm sorry, the bane of my existence right now is Shein. And I'm sure I'm going to assume everyone knows who they are, Temu and Shein and what have you. And these guys are just, they're claiming sustainability, and it drives me crazy.
It's the worst example.
You cannot sell a T-shirt for less than a cup of coffee and call it sustainable. In no way stretch your imagination. But, they're going to say it, and they've got a lot of money to buy those search terms. And so they can own that so a consumer can feel good about it, because it might be 5% of one of their garments might be made out of recycled polyester, therefore sustainable. And there's no policies being written. So, I mean, we could go down a very dark hall here, but I think my message to you and your listeners is we're piloting a better way. And I think we're probably in the front of the wave of consumer demand. But, if you look at Generation Alpha, they're not going to know a world without climate change. They're not going to know a world without issues in their air quality, in their water quality, in their food quality. And they're going to have to care. And they're also empowered with a unprecedented amount of data coming their way. Yeah. So it's the combination of like, how does this generation coming up with these global macro issues they're facing with, whether it be geopolitical or climate, then you have this unprecedented amount of data in front of you. They're going to be able to make decisions at a very granular basis. They're no longer going to have this, this famous, you probably remember when we were growing up, like the famous, Native American crying at the side of a highway because of all the littering. First of all, he wasn't Native American. He was an actor. Second of all, that was paid for by Big Plastic. But that's how Big Plastic was able to just whitewash their sins away by putting it back on us. Just don't throw your trash out the window of the car, and everything will be fine.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen anymore. Future generations, they're going to be able to get into the nuts and bolts. They're going to be able to access your book. They're going to be able to access brands like Unless. They're going to be able to access information on how things are made, where things are made, the working conditions they're made in, and everything else. That's just going to be transparencies. No one's going to be able to avoid transparency anymore. Not with the advent of AI as we see it coming. So you can't hide. So I'm actually very hopeful that if you do the right thing, you'll be rewarded more and more. But right now, it can be a little dark at times, because you do the right thing and you can get snowed under by a bigger spender on the Zuckerberg paywall. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too. It's like there is obviously a lot of money going through deception.
Yeah.
And using social media. Hell, you can go down the rabbit hole on politics and like everything you think you know is being given to you through media in some form. So you've got that, all of that stuff is already gnarly.
Yep.
Right? I've got some SEAL Team 6 buddies and people, and so we bounce some certain things off of them just to get some feedback of like, and it's gnarly that way. So that aside, I think I hold that same optimism as you, in the sense that you can have one person now also do a post about plastic in your nuts, in your balls, right? From this company.
Yep.
And overnight, if that company doesn't respond, it can crush them.
Yeah.
Right? Because it goes both ways, right? It can go in the wrong direction if someone is plotting to do that to you or a company, but also in the right direction.
Yeah.
Whereas, these things are only popping up because of advocacy of people, of organizations that, this is the funny thing I found in writing my book. I'm like, wait a minute, you have a PFAS chemical action committee at the government that you just initiated, and yet you have quote unquote regulatory bodies that were supposed to do that job anyway, right? So what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
And why is it reversed like that? So I do have hope in that way, because they better be afraid, bigger companies, because if they don't do the right thing, it is one tweet away.
And I think the challenge we share is, how do we simplify it? How do we tell a simpler story? Because you can get lost in, like just even the technical jargon, the acronyms, the whole thing. Just like, I mean, we throw around PFAS like, oh, everybody knows what PFAS is. I don't think many people know what PFAS are. Yeah. But I think there's a growing awareness. But I think the challenge for me has always been, as a marketer for a big company, and to say, okay, what's the visual? What's going to stop them scrolling? Because I think recycling doesn't do it. I think sustainability doesn't do it. I think polar bears, had its moment. But I think it really comes down to like, what's going to stop them? What I learned is like, it's always like, it's the product times the story. Like, I'm trying to sell a specific product. Now, what's the story I want to sell that as? And I think that's where, even Attenborough says climate change has a storytelling issue. It's not that there isn't an issue. Exactly. So it's how do we demonstrate that? You've done enough, productions, whether it be TV or movies or podcasts, to know storytelling has got to be at the top of our list. So how do we simplify it and galvanize as a friend of mine used this, the citizen scientists, so they can know what there is in their environment, what's in this room. Right. We should be able to detect that. Right. We should be able to, and that's a simple brief. And I think we need to get to these simple briefs that can show people what's my air quality right now. I think we have that for the most part after COVID, but what's my water quality? What's my food quality? And some of those are in different places. But I was having dinner with a friend the other day, and it was like, wouldn't it be amazing? They put a jug of water on the table, and wouldn't it be amazing if we could, test that water and see exactly what's in that, whether it be lead or whether it be microplastics or whether it be. But that would galvanize, and that's a brief now. Mm-hmm. Somebody can fix that in months, if not years, and attach it to our iPhones, and now we can measure those things. But it's like, that's the type of thing we need to have. And then when you come along with something like the Unless Collective, which is what we're doing, is like, how do I storytell, the K-pocket insulation that we have in our jackets, or the Mirum plant-based leather we have in our shoes, or the laces are done differently because they don't have plastic aglets. And the way we found it is like, just show it going back to ground, show it in a partially decomposed state. That shows worms and plants growing, and so because it's actually becoming plant and worm food. And I think when we do that in these gallery boxes where we present ourselves at retail and stuff, people lose their minds. They're like, "Oh, I had no idea." It's like, yeah. Right. And like I showed you earlier, I showed you like the difference between a poly blend garment, what happens to that when it's getting ready to go back to dirt, and cotton. And cotton becomes these nutrient-rich soil ingredients, and poly blend never breaks down, and it becomes these little hardcore micro or nanoplastics that enter us. Yeah. And I think that's somehow we have to get to that storytelling where people can understand what's in their environment, yes, but also then why is this product different than this product, and how is it displaying itself? Because otherwise we don't stand a chance. But we're just screaming into the wind and talking to go back to our social media, talking to our own little vacuum of believers already.
And that is the issue, right? Yeah. It's also the algorithmic issue. Yeah. If it feeds us what we're looking for, right? And then we keep looking for that same thing.
Exactly.
And there is this element of entertainment that, from my perspective, people have so little resilience for more information. That's why I was like, people were like, "Oh, it's such a great book you're putting out." I'm like going, I know, but it's a lot. It's a reference book. I mean, you've identified. Yeah. I mean, if I care about, I've got two daughters. If I care about how they're going to treat their faces with mascara or with lip gloss or sunscreen, it's like, we're going to start here, right? And what are the lookouts? Right. What's Darin saying the lookouts are? Okay, and we don't have to digest the whole book at once. I mean, just I have, but I mean, I think you can pick the chapters that you can really dive into. I think is super helpful, and I think that's it's a start, right? Yeah. All we can do is keep taking steps. Yeah, and I think from your perspective, it's like sometimes outside of ourselves we see ourselves, right? So you see your daughters, and you're like, oh man, they are me. Like they're they're literally my family. So I need to look out for them. And also that came true in the placental border, that when we grew up, they were like, go ahead, you can smoke. There's a placental border and you can drink too, because everything's going to protect that baby. Yeah. No. And there is no border. There's hundreds of chemicals.
There's no way.
There's no way again, right?
It keeps going in. Like that little baby's being exposed to everything you're exposing yourself to.
Yeah.
Which, thank God, we're resilient as much as we are, because I mean we've all we've all done things we may grow to regret.
Yeah.
But I think that it's that legacy thing with your family that is the unlock to how we get everybody on one side, because everybody cares about their family. Yeah. Everybody cares about their kids. I haven't yet to meet one person, I don't care where they come from on the political spectrum, that doesn't care about the ocean.
Right.
Or care about the mountains.
Right.
Or care about, their children. It's like, so that's like, no one's sitting there saying we have to believe in this bag or this bag. You have to say, can we agree that we want to protect those that are that inherit our names?
Right.
If we can disagree with that, then let me tell you what's harming them.
Yeah.
Because when they're sick, and we saw it during the COVID pandemic, when they're sick, people will go to the wall for them.
Yeah.
And because your job as a family member is to protect your family first and foremost. So that we just have to cross that border, right? And let people understand that and find commonalities where we can, versus always screaming into the wind at each other.
Yeah, and that's the illumination through the stories and entertainment.
Yes.
And because it to your point, this was screaming loud and clear too. It's like the mama bears of the world. Like, if they knew that this plastic convenient diaper was full of phthalates and formaldehyde and undisclosed gnarly fragrances, you would not knowingly put that on your beautiful child's skin, transdermally affect. So it's like they're not thinking that.
No, they're not at all.
They don't know that that's causing.
I've used those diapers. Yeah. I mean, and to be quite honest, I did not know, and I feel I've been studying this for 7 years. I did not know about the scent until your book.
Right.
I had no idea that my college years of Drakkar Noir shortened my life. So, but to me, it's like that's such a critical point to not just help me understand, but that gets into the world. And so, but I'm 100% with you. I don't think that mama bear knows that you can transdermally absorb things. Mm-hmm. That's been recent. I mean, again, I'm on this journey with everyone else. Like I may be a little further ahead, but I'm on this journey too. And it's like, do people know that you can your skin absorbs more things than any other organ in your body? Mm-hmm. And now, in my space, activewear, which is the stretchy, Lulu, aloe, all that stuff. It's some of the worst, because first of all, we don't have a solve for stretchy. Oh man. It's one of the 5 horsemen that the industry and fashion has not solved for a plant-based solution to stretch. Right. Because stretch in short is
not in that way, not in that full.
No, stretch is melted plastic in a polyester form, nylon, spandex, lycra, you name it. It's just another name of basically melted plastic. And they cook it with such chemicals, and I always dumb this thing down, so I appreciate you. They cook it with the chemicals that those chemicals are now, and you maybe know more, when you sweat those chemicals are triggered by that and activate and actually absorbing in your body quicker, and yet they're made to sweat in. Right. Of course you wear compression tights to sweat in. That's why people wear them. And now they're saying, no, I'm activating all the phthalates so they go in my bloodstream even faster. Right. That's not good. Yeah, so, but that's recent discovery by me in the last, year. Right. So I again, as a 30-year fashion industry expert, I can't expect your listeners or consumers in general to know that. So how do we tell that to them in a non-attacking way? How do we get them to understand those things, and not take it as a defensive battle? Or how do we find a brand that's going to solve for stretch, and be that solution? Right. And there's a few out there. It's always like 85% or 90%. You still can't get 100% off of Lycra.
And then there's a few kind of trademarks that are popping up that are better. Yeah. But then you have our mutual friend Jeff Garner, right? I always go to Jeff. I'm like, maybe, but how did they get this color on there? And he's like, it's that. So now you have a whole nother issue with color. You have a whole nother issue with
the 5 big issues we've solved for a lot of things, but the 5 big ones in the industry are the stretch we talked about, the dyes, the colors, the printing. So the when you dye this black, this water-based dye, But if I were print on top of this, typically, almost always, you'd have to lay down plastisol level, which is just a crunchy plastic, plastisol plastic, and then you print on top of that. So you have to bleach out, or you use formaldehyde to bleach out the black so you can put color on it. So again, stretch, dyes, prints, foams. So almost all foams are polyurethane. You can't. I mean, we have a bit of a cork foam in here, but it's not perfected by any stretch of the imagination. And then the last one is glues or adhesives. When we were kids, it was, the joke was it was made out of horses, that were retired. They were horse glue. I mean, but now it's a 100% polyurethane. Glues and things, especially the big industrial ones. So when you open that shoebox, you usually get that first. It's all glue. It's like sniffing glue. All these things are all for a reason, but they're not good for you whenever those things enter into the equation. So, but glues in general, we found one now that's starting to be in beta form that could be used. But in the meantime, you have to make your shoes with just good old fashioned linen stitch and get it to stay together. But it's a compromise to what glues can do.
Yeah, so you have so we can educate people, but there's, in the grand scheme of things, there's very few options.
Yeah.
I mean, scary how little options there are for scalable choices, and then you add on to it, are they affordable for people? And listen, we've been duped with the cost of things because we've been... obviously that's not a sustainable cost. It never has been. So people believe that they can get 5 T-shirts for, $9.99, and that's just really wrong.
I think that one of the things we started on less was because we wanted to give an option. I mean, we clearly, you've heard a little bit of my story. My co-founders share my story, but we clearly wanted to solve this problem of harmful waste at end of life. Yeah. And I think the tighter you can write that brief, the more you can solve for it. So if we said we just want to start a sustainable fashion brand, like I said, you could pull any one of these litany of things and call it sustainable. And the most popular one is recycled polyester, which we found is probably even worse for the world. But nevertheless, we said, hey, we're going to solve for the problem of harmful waste at end of life. That's a very clear brief. And therefore, upstream, if you start at the end in mind first, upstream, you have plant-based solutions that are going to be all sorts of goodness. But I don't have to spend a lot of time and resources trying to adhere to all these different pseudo regulations like, B Corps. And it's like, no, guys, I'm just solving for this problem over here. I don't want to be into the organic cotton debate of whether it's coming from the transparency of whether it's the Uyghurs in China making it or it's like, no, I'm not going to deal with any of that. I'm dealing with this, and then we'll solve for it. And we need to, our end goal is to systemically change the fashion industry by proving that this not only is a better way of making things, the consumers will vote for it, and the unit economics will be on par with oil. Because if you're going to replace oil, and this is a friend of mine at Natural Fiber Welding is telling me, is Luke Henning tells me all the time. He's like, if you're going to replace oil, Luke Haverhals, if you're going to replace oil, you have to replace it with something as plentiful and abundant as oil. Well, there's maybe one or two things that I can think of, and one is plants. So you've got to start creating things out of the power of plants, and whether it be plant-based proteins that we're seeing in the food industry, or whether it be plant-based polymers that I think have a rich future in the fashion industry. But you've got to give that consumer that option that you talked about. If you can give them that option, then you've got to make sure they understand that's a clear option and scale it from an audience and distribution, which is why I'm sitting here with you today to tell people the story so that we can give them that option. And I think every industry needs it. Every industry you cover, beauty industry, toy industry, home industry, it's like every industry you can think of needs those solutions and needs that optionality. And I just don't see enough of it happening at the pace that I think we need to see it with the urgency we need.
What are you, because I know you probably nerd out about these things, like in terms of like material science, like mycelium is even making a lot of movements.
Magic of mushrooms. Unfortunately, been around enough material innovations to know, when I go into materials conversations, and I'm not a chemist, I'm just a guy that's been around the industry for a few years. You look for two things. You look for, can it replace the current set of materials from a functionality standpoint? Mm-hmm. Is it flexible? Is it temperature resistant? Is it durable? The different tests you would need to have. Can it adhere? So to that. And then secondly, does it have the unit economics to replace? Because ultimately anyone can do anything once. In anybody can do lot size one. Right. You can.
I did it.
You can 3D print a mycelium shoe from scratch. That's great, but ultimately, mycelium I have found doesn't have the unit economics you need. And when I was running Adidas, it was always clear during innovation, profiles, when people would bring new innovations, we would spend a lot of time talking about, can we get to price parity within 3 years? If not 3, it's got to be 5. And so I remember when we did the one time I gave the exception to 5 was on 3D printing we did with Carbon 3D, which was a digital light synthesis printing. It's like when they print it, the shape comes out of the liquid ooze. It's like a Terminator movie. It's wow. Fucking unbelievable. We should check it out. Carbon 3D. They're videos of, and they're doing football helmets now. They're doing bike seats. They did shoes. At one point, Adidas was the largest 3D printing company in the world from a volume. Wow. Because we were printing so many midsoles with them. Wow. Fantastic. But unit economics were always, it was challenging to get, to get competitive with the existing Superstar Cup sole type thing, so that you couldn't get there. But regardless of that, you should always give yourself a price parity window if you really want to systemically change things within 3 to 5 years. And so whenever I go into a new material conversation, we map where they are. Where are you? What is your performance features? Okay, check. What is your pricing? How are you going to get to? How are you going to get this plant-based leather to the equivalent of a leather? Because if I'm going to go after the leather industry, if I'm going to go after replacing that, yes, there's an ethical thing. Yes, there's a sustainability thing when you talk about the heavy metals and everything that goes into tanning the hides. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, to change the industry, which is what I want to do. I'm foolish enough to think I can systemically change fashion. To change that, I need to have a comparable product to replace it 100%, right. Which means functionality and price. And that's the only way, living in a capitalist society, we're going to make the changes we want to see. And that's, the comps are electric vehicles and plant-based proteins. I think they both have done an admirable job.
Yeah. Are there materials that you feel more optimistic than others? Like, what are you most excited about?
So we are very tech agnostic. So and so when I say that, I mean, like, we are specifically not a tech company. We want to be a brand that uses all the available tech. So we will play with the best we found. Mm-hmm. To answer your question, I think we have, apparel is really developing better and better off the shelf solutions. So like, this knit crew I'm wearing right now, it's basically 100% cotton, but the most important piece is how's it put together? It's really the stitch lines, because almost 100% of the time those are nylon or synthetic. We insist and work with the factories. You can't use that. Okay. You can't do that. What are you doing for the taping on the neck? What are you doing for the wrist? How are you creating that stretch we talked about? Well, that's a mechanical stretch. So it's going to be more like your old school Champion or Russell in athletic wear, which is very much on trend, and I tend to like. Right. And then we do a garment dye versus a fabric dye, so it gives a little bit more of a vibe to it, where it's got kind of a surf, skate, snowboard type of look. So that's pretty much solvable just by diligence in the construction and the dyeing and printing. And by the way, dyes and prints I said are not solvable. The best you can use is water-based right now, but there are some innovations coming with the algae dyes and things like that. Right. They just can't get past black at this point. So I'm monitoring. I've got friends in all those areas. Wovens, like the vest I showed you earlier, which is really cool when we want to do an insulated woven, then you have to use, what are the nuts? Okay, those right. What are the buttons? The buttons are made out of Corozo nuts. Right. Corozo nuts are harvested, from the ground in again, equatorial states. And then we put the K-POC in for the insulation. So you can find your way to the solutions. Canvas is cotton, of course. And then, but even like doing a little embroidery patch, finding someone that will do embroidery without using nylon threads that's 3 months of work, and you end up in Portugal and they're charging you an arm and a leg. So, so now but all those little things, right, go into it. So, footwear is the bigger challenge. The footwear innovation, which is the one that's talked about a lot. Like Mycelium did some things really interesting. They're always doing these capsule collections. I think I would just caution you and the general audience to be aware of capsules, because I think we do a great job in the fashion industry to do capsules. And they say, oh, this Mycelium thing by XY, and I don't want to name brands because I'll just piss off everybody that I want to work with. But oh yeah, it's great. And they do a capsule and it's $500 price point, and then it's gone after 2 months, and it never scales into their fundamental business. So if you think about a 10 billion company, a 20 billion company, a 50 billion company, a collection of 10,000 units is nothing.
Right.
It's not even a teardrop.
Do you think that is something that they then use as why did they do it? Just to kind of...
I don't like to say greenwashing, because I think that that implies complicity, and I think I would say that greenwashing. I think there's a lot of ignorance. We talked about that. Right. There's a lot of not knowing, and I think people generally, I always try to assume positive intent. I think people generally want to do the right thing, and they think that's signaling that this company means something around this topic. But unless they can back it up, and that's fine if that's the tip of the spear. But I want to see the rest of the spear then. I want to see what you're doing the rest of the way and how you're playing that all the way through. And at Adidas, we spent a lot of time working on that. Like, so Partly for the Oceans was the tip of the spear, but then we had Prime Blue, which was product made with ocean plastic, partly ocean plastic. Then we had Prime Green, which was product made with recycled polyester. So we had 3 steps of it, recognizing that one was going to be limited edition, capsules, but we didn't stop there. We kept playing it down. So I don't think capsules are bad. I think capsules are limited editions. That's the scarcity, desirability through scarcity model that's been very played through many industries. But it's a question of how are you going to fundamentally change your business structure overall? I don't want this just to be a virtue signal from a brand. I have very little tolerance for that. It's got to be the tip of, hey, that's your storytelling device. Great. How are you now rolling that out through the company? Because if you're not, then you're dancing with greenwashing to greenwashing.
Right. What's your goal for Unless Collective and your next chapter? What's your ultimate dream? What do you want to see happen?
So thank you for asking. That's very clear. So we want to systemically change the industry, and we have a 3-pronged attack to do that. One is to pioneer what we're calling regenerative fashion, because when you say that, it already makes you think something else other than just the sustainability term. So we want to pioneer saying, hey, we know how to make a shoe, we know how to make a sock, And by the way, sock was a 2-year expert because of stretch. Again, it's like these things are hard, but 2 years working with the smartest guys in the sock business that I could find. So it's not an easy thing. Each one of these innovations is a long, dark hallway that we love, but. We can make a beanie. We can make a bucket hat. We can make a baseball hat. We can make wovens. We can make knits. We can make socks. We can make shoes. We've modeled what I think all the essential ingredients to a regenerative brand can do. So that was step one, and now we're scaling that from a consumer standpoint, whether it be in D2C or wholesale retail. But we now built that, and we built a regenerative creation model about how to do that. So here's the materials, here's how you put it together, here's how you print and dye it, here's how you distribute, collect it, put it back in the ground. So we got partnerships all the way through there. We're working with industrial composter, the largest one in California, called Agrman, who's basically doing all of our soil tests after as a post-consumer thing. So as we test these things, whether it be offcuts from the factory floor, or whether it's stuff we get back from the consumer, we make sure the soil is always going to be clean, that he can then go sell to farmers or gardeners that want to use it in their rose or tomato gardens.
Amazing.
So that's the regenerative creation model. But that also allows us, once we have that, to take that model and partner with big brands, whether it be Gap or H&M or Uniqlo or Nike or Adidas or New Balance or Under Armour. Like all of them we can partner with them because we now have this 4 years of muscle memory. We know how to build this, and we can either do it from a collab standpoint, where we can do this collaboration, and then we show them that works. We can bring that into their system to really work in, because at the end of the day, we really don't want to create generational wealth for the founders. That's not why this startup exists. We want to be very respectful and honor our investor community that's come in and support us to get this far. Want to make sure they get their money out of it. But ultimately, the founders are very clear. We want to create generational change. Generational wealth is nice, but generational change is the critical piece to how we do this thing to change this. So ultimately, if we build the brand, the know-how, we partner, we collab, and we partner with the infrastructure of the incumbent brands, I think that's going to really set us on a hook. And I've given myself a personal mission that 15% of the industry should be made out of regenerative fashion techniques in 10 years. Because only then, that 15% is what I've looked at from an electric car. That's the inflection point to see, okay, now you've got momentum and scale that's going to change and everybody's going to follow in. But it's going to take the consumer, it's probably going to take some policy, and it's going to take the know-how.
Right. I love that you have in your model this bridge into the bigger companies.
You have to.
Right.
I mean, otherwise you're...
Other than you're fighting against, or a competitor too.
Yeah.
When in fact, I come from you. I have now proved this out. Let me help you, in a sense, like if you had someone like you come to you
exactly
with all of this knowledge that they already went through.
You get it.
Yeah.
So it's really... So I've just learned a lot, muscle memory from the Parlay for the Oceans example. So I was sitting in that chair. Parlay came to me. I was like, we should do something here. It blew up bigger than anybody in the company would have realized at the time.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking, okay, that was good, but that's still plastic.
Right.
It's still collected plastic. So ultimately, you're still leaching microfibers into the washing machine, into the systems. So, okay, everybody knows what's better than plastic? Plants. I'm going to go do that. Let's model the plant solution.
Right.
Now let's do the Parlay model and come inside some of these bigs and get them to work with us, because I think that is the big circle. Because if you just get stuck, everybody talks about circularity. That's another big buzzword out there. And I love circularity, but I just find the practicalities very hard to get around. And there's two big practicalities there. One is, if you don't mind me going on. So one is take back. How are you going to get post-consumer? The unit economics don't measure out. Again, going back to that, the shipping costs alone.
Right.
Free shipping is one thing if you're making a sale, but free returns is already starting to really hamper all the D2C companies. Now you're going to say, "Oh, I'll take your stuff back." Who's paying for the shipping?
Right.
No one's stepping up for that. And the drop off, we know that doesn't really work. So there's some companies trying to pilot it. I will say that there's a company called Trashy that's doing some good stuff. There used to be 4 Days apparel company. They're doing some good things with their take back bag. But that's for another story. But I think that's one unit economics that's tough on the take back. The other one is the chemical recycling that's required to take apart primarily a blended product of cotton and polyester and things like that. So what am I doing with that? Where are those recycling mills going to set up? And where does that mean it's got to go back to Asia to do that? Or where? And by the way, the chemicals are going into chemical recycling are pretty nasty.
Right.
So you can you can make it circular and then chop it up. And then use it in down cycle things. Like if you chop up all your used apparel, you can then put it into, sleeping bags or something like that as an insulator. So ultimately, what I like about our circularity is it's made out of plants.
Right.
If you give it back to us, sure, we'll pay for that shipping, but we don't have that as a scale out. But we'll make it go away back into good soil in 30 days. Right. More importantly, Darin, you can put it in your yard.
Right.
And grow plants out of it if you want.
Right.
Ultimately, wear it as long as you can. It's going to wear as long as anything else, but it will go harmlessly away. Right. Something you can be happy with in your house and in your gardens.
Right. Well, I've thought about this a long time, because it's like you have to turn off the faucet, and the faucet is this constant 450 million metric tons of plastic being created every year, and all of this stuff. And it's like recycling, we failed at it. We can't do that. We're not recycling. It's not at scale enough. So we're still, and it's still harmful. So I talked to my good friends who are the scientists in the clean energy space, and they're just like, annihilate it.
Yeah.
Just drive it into oblivion, meaning drive it into graphene and carbon black, where there's no more chemicals left. Where we have levers where we can pull that off today. We have ability to do it, because we also have these, it's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can talk, but clean energy, like if I were to tell you, I can show you video off air of this technology, will blow your freaking mind.
Yeah, please.
So now we have an energy source, and we can create these boxes. Paralysis, which I invested in back in the day, you throw almost anything into a pressure and temperature, and you can break it down into its constituents.
Yep.
And then they're like, oh, let's use the gas. Well, take it another step.
Yep.
And just drive it back into literally its molecular compounds where there's no more dirty anything.
Wow.
And then put that. So that's possible today.
Yep.
We need resources to finalize certain things because we're also working on.
So you're basically pulverizing plastic back to oil?
Even further.
Okay.
Back to carbon.
Okay.
Essentially.
Back to like just the building blocks of like plants where oil comes from. Yeah. Okay.
Just drive it all the way down. Like we call it the annihilator.
Okay.
Like because we talked to the NFL, we talked with like let's have zero waste.
Yep.
Airports.
Yep.
Stadiums. No waste is leaving that place.
Yep.
And that's what we talked about. And a good friend of mine walked in there and they're like, please, we would do that. So you take these shit gobblers and you just drive it into oblivion. You get rid of it. There's no upcycling. Like you say, like, let's use the polyester again. Like, no, let's not. Let's not.
Yep.
Right? So this is where I would love to see things go. Let's create, to your point, let's create these alternatives for scale.
Yep.
Let's demonstrate. Let's do it.
Yep.
And then let's turn off the faucet.
Well, so what we're trying to do is exactly that. Turn off the water. What you're talking about is cleaning up the water on the floor and like pulverizing it back to where it came from, which is a nice two-pronged punch.
Yeah. Well, there's I think it's like there's 3 to 5 rivers that are polluting like 70% of the ocean, right? Coming out of China, coming out of Africa. And if you set up stations there, just that amount of waste that we can't actually fathom. When you and I talk about away, we could jump on a plane and we could show where that away is. So there is no away. And it is so horrifying.
Well, you can see it from space. The Atacama Desert with waste and the Ghana waste.
Exactly.
I mean, that's where all the clothing is going.
Yeah.
You can see it from satellites. It's despicable.
Yeah. And that's back to our storytelling, back to our, how do you do this? How do you do enough entertainment, but also enough information to people go, that's not right.
Yep.
And now where's the solution? What can I do? Like from down to earth, we had hundreds of thousands of people every day going, I'm inspired. What do I do? Where do I go? How do I help?
Yep.
And this is where we've messed up. Yep. I was telling people from the beginning, we have to create a foundation to help people.
Point them somewhere.
Yeah. Netflix got it the second season.
Yep.
They started putting programs together, but I think it was disjointed. It didn't do
it's all right though, but you learn from that.
Yeah,
right?
you learn from that.
But you do need to point. You need to point people towards a solution, and 100%. You do I'm not here to promote your book, but you do a very nice job of pointing to solutions. You've thought that through. So you learn from that down to earth, and now you say, okay, I'm gonna address that in the book. Yeah. I mean, because you've given people an outlet to buy better. Yeah. So, and I think that's what we can do, and then we can, in the meantime. I mean, I'm about systemic change. I think the other thing that recycling has been propped up by big oil, and it's been basically a finger wagging thing, is you need to green your life. You, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer, are the problem, and it's the same thing we heard in the '70s from the littering stuff. It's like, no, I'm sorry, we're not the problem. We don't have any other choice. Right. So when I order a cup of coffee at whatever, and and I don't have my reusable mug, you're giving me basically a nice dose of PFAS to start my day. Right. It's like, and no one seems to care because, Starbucks has had their challenge for at least 10 years since I've known Howard, trying to replace their cups with a better cup. It's like, they haven't.
Good luck with cardboard and hot beverages.
Exactly. So my point is, it's not on the consumer, it's on business. And we need to give consumers better choices that systemically change and disrupt those industries. And And, say what you want about Elon Musk and Tesla, but they did that in electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And say what you will about Oatly and plant-based milks, but I've been a vegan for a number of years. And before Oatly came along, or oat milk in general, but even before Oatly, you had to choke back an almond drink pretty hard.
Yeah.
You were taking one for the team.
Right.
And now you're like, oh, who doesn't want a cappuccino with Oatly versus, versus cow milk?
And it's so easy to make oat milk too.
So easy to
my
make. So
God.
it's like that's where we need to get to in every industry, because then you have these systemic changes that are just go faster than you can even imagine. And that's what we did at Adidas with the plastic thing. So I've seen it happen in a smaller scale, and I'm confident it can happen on a bigger scale with the industry. But it's a $3 trillion industry.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be light, but it's why not?
Yeah, and listen, I've met some great people in this space, and I like to say this up, and I'll say it to you too, because it's hope. So, I have a good friend who developed this company. He's no longer at the company. It's a whole nother horrible story that way. But anyway, he was a material science guy, so he started developing alternatives to single-use plastic at scale.
Yep.
Mechanisms didn't even. So he had to create mechanisms to produce this stuff. ConAgra, McDonald's, Pepsi, Walmart were all their clients, right? And so he was working at solving all of those, from ConAgra's macaroni and cheese box. He's solving all of that.
Yep.
So now what my buddy's doing is he's got an alternative to PFAS from algae. He's already got the formula. He's already and he goes, and listen, it might even be cheaper. So he's raised.
But is the company name Philium?
No.
Okay. Because they're doing something interesting in Seattle also.
Yeah, we all need to.
I just think once you have a brief,
yes,
the smart designers and engineers will answer it. I've never met a problem they can't solve.
Totally. So he's got that division, and he's simultaneously buying a packaging company. Current customers are McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, all of that stuff. So he's going to go flip. He's going to flip it all.
Awesome.
So these are the things, right? There's people like you. There's people that want to do the right thing. There's things that we need to do. And again, I'm going to emphasize this. I love the fact that in your model, you're going to bridge into bigger companies, because that's what's going to flip
and it's the only way to do it with the urgency we need.
Totally.
Sure, I could slow grow 10 million, 100 million, maybe $1 billion one day if you dream, but ultimately, no, we need to go now.
Right.
And I would have loved to have come out of the blocks and then done $1 billion in business right away and had influencers lining up, but that's just not what the world presented me with.
Right.
So here we are. So I'll partner with the bigs to bring it to life. And I think that's always up to the receptivity of the people in management, but also the vision. So I try to work with people I know that have a vision to create things from scratch, and stay tuned.
Dude, Epic, such a great conversation. I'm stoked that you pivoted, that you're doing what you're doing, and the Wisconsin heart is shining.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man.
It's been a real pleasure. And as I told you when we met last year at the Green Carpet Awards, it was like, I'm a big fan of what you've been doing. I've been following you forever, and it's been an opportunity to come down here and sit with you in Malibu. It's not so bad.
Yeah, man. Thanks, brother. Plant power.
That's the future.
That's right.
Plants.
Cheers.